There's a kid out of New York City named Konrad Bisher who spent the past couple of years defrauding New York City landlords and the US government, allegedly. He made millions of dollars doing this through an Airbnb sublet scheme. We'll talk more about what that means later. This scheme afforded Konrad fancy cars, designer clothing, and a lifestyle that he always dreamed of as somebody who grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania. But all of these exciting times have since come to a screeching halt because now Konrad has a federal indictment with 3 charges stacked against him that could land him in prison for the next 40 years. Even though what Konrad was allegedly doing out here in New York was very unethical and illegal, he was actually kind of proud of his crimes and even flaunted them a bit. In an interview with The Real Deal, he called himself the Wolf of Airbnb. He told them that that meant someone who is hungry and ruthless enough to get on top of the financial ladder. In today's episode, let's talk about who this Wolf of Airbnb is, exactly what he was doing wrong that got him in so much trouble, and then what his sentencing could look like if he's found guilty. So Konrad grew up in a small town called Schuylkill County in Pennsylvania. This is a region with a population of 143,000. It's just northwest of Philadelphia. And he was adopted at a very young age by a Mennonite family, which is a faith that's pretty straight-laced and strict, kind of similar to the Amish community. Reports say that Konrad always felt a bit like an outcast during his upbringing, and he had the urge to travel the world. Specifically, though, he had big dreams to eventually move to New York, which was only a few hours away by car from where he grew up, about 140 miles away. The timeline of Konrad's life and crimes can be summed up like this, and by the way, any references to crimes during this episode are just allegations at this time, since he hasn't actually been convicted yet. So he's 31 years old today. He was born back in July of 1991. By 2012, he moved to New York City at the age of 21 to pursue his dreams in real estate. He got right away on building out his illegal subletting short-term rental business. He had that completely up and running by 2013. Konrad was arrested for his first crime in 2015 for grand larceny, but he somehow avoided jail time on this one. What he was doing back then, by the way, was basically renting out apartments around Manhattan, never moving into them himself, but then re-advertising the apartments on Craigslist for rent. Then once he found some people interested in that apartment, he would collect a couple of security deposits, then basically just run away with the money. From 2015 to 2019, Konrad continued to scam New York City landlords by basically renting apartments out from them and then releasing those apartments to other people short-term on Airbnb. At this point, he had about 20 apartments that he was leasing out from landlords and then releasing out short-term. Around 2020, he stopped paying rent to all of those 20 landlords that he was renting these apartments from. He filed for pandemic relief at this time, saying that he couldn't afford to pay those 20 landlords rent. But the catch is that he was still collecting a bunch of rent from all of those tenants that he was renting these apartments out to short-term. To make matters even harder on his landlords, remember, back in the pandemic days, there were all these eviction moratoriums. So not only did Konrad get away with scamming the government for around $565,000 for that PPP loan, but the 20 landlords he was renting from couldn't even evict him if they wanted to because of these eviction moratoriums that were put in place. Fast forward to 2022, and Konrad was arrested in Florida, and prosecutors filed a federal indictment against him. Now, of the 20 apartments that Konrad was renting all over Manhattan, most of them were located in the Upper Manhattan area, which, if you know New York real estate, this is not a cheap place to live. The average rent rate in Manhattan is higher than ever, with an average monthly rate of $5,058 as of the summer of 2022. So we don't know exactly how much the Wolf of Wall Street was paying for his apartments in Manhattan, but based on the averages, he was shelling out somewhere around $100,000 per month in rent for these apartments. The $100,000 per month figure sounds about right too, because going back to that indictment, according to the charges, Konrad and his associates failed to make more than $1 million in payments pursuant to the lease agreements. But what's even more messed up is that during that window of time where he was not paying rent, he had these units listed short-term on Airbnb for rent, and he made at least $1,170,000 in rental income. So let's just add this all up really quick. So Konrad brought in around $1.17 million in rental income over this roughly 2-year span. Plus, he brought in another $565,000 in PPP loan assistance from the government due to not being able to afford to pay rent during the pandemic. That means that the Wolf of Wall Street brought in a total of around $1.7 million in income over this short 2-year span. It's pretty clear what rules were broken here, but breaking down the charges against Konrad, we have 2 counts of wire fraud and then 1 count of aggravated identity theft. Count 1 on the indictment says that Konrad knowingly entered lease agreements for units in apartment buildings in Manhattan with the intent to violate the lease agreements by failing to make required monthly payments and posting the units for short-term rental on Airbnb. Count 2 says that he engaged in a scheme to obtain government-guaranteed loans through SBA designed to provide relief to small businesses, and he obtained over $565,000 in loan proceeds, but the applications for those PPP loans contained fraudulent documents and false applications. Then count 3 says that Konrad used, without lawful authority, the means of identification of another person in connection with loan applications related to count 2 of the indictment. There are so many ways to legitimately make money in real estate. It kind of baffles me that this guy seemed to be trying so hard to break the law. Like, what was he thinking? Another layer to all of this that I didn't see outlined in the indictment is that short-term rentals were actually banned in New York City in 2011, meaning you can't even rent anything out there for less than 30 days at a time. So really there were 2 major issues with this scheme. First is that Konrad was signing year-long leases with all of these landlords saying that he would be living in the space, and then he was subleasing those apartments on Airbnb, which his lease with the landlord did not allow. But then to top that off, New York City says that short-term rentals aren't even allowed to begin with, so he was kind of breaking 2 rules at once. I did check Airbnb just out of curiosity, and there's actually over 1,000 apartments currently available on Airbnb as of the filming of this video, so it's possible that I'm missing a loophole or something here. If any of you guys out there are from Manhattan, let me know how it's possible for all of these listings to be showing up on Airbnb like this. Attorneys for Bicher are saying that he's going to plead not guilty to these charges. No surprise there. But there's quite a bit of evidence stacked against him, especially from those New York City landlords that he was screwing over. Plus that conviction he had back in 2015, I don't think is going to help his case much either. The wire fraud counts carry a max 20-year prison sentence each, and then that identity theft, another 2-year sentence, which means that Konrad could be facing a max of 42 years in prison if the judge wants to go hard on him. I doubt he'll go in for that long, but if he does, this kid is going to be 73 years old when he gets out. I hope that you guys enjoyed today's episode. If you did, hit the like button or leave a comment down below about what you thought. I'll see you next time.